Hello there, everybody, and John just walked away. There you go, John.
Oh,
Hello.
he's back! Woo!
Welcome to DM Roundtable, and welcome to all of you. I already see that there's a plethora of activity happening in the chat, and I'm always very happy to see that. However, I would prefer if from now on you could keep your discussion of nudes to the privacy of your own DMs.
Family-friendly stream.
Yeah, the Discord server is 18+, but the stream, family friendly. Also, I moved, and now this isn't a green screen. This is my stuff in an office, which is a lot of fun. I'm gonna show off. I got these cool bar lights. I can do colors. It's bad. It's evil. Oh, green looks like teal. Whoa, that's really green on my end, and it's blue. It's so blue. It's kind of funny how well it's showing up now versus earlier. I think it's just because it's
earlier.
I think it's because
it was lights out.
It's nighttime.
Yeah, I said light side on accident. Meant light outside.
All right.
That's okay. But yeah, so I just wanted to show that off because I am a fan. But today, what we are talking about is we're talking about dungeons. Sadly, not to be deceitful, we're not talking about diners, drive-ins, or dives. We might later on, but it just depends on how long we talk about dungeons. It could be a monsters to dragons situation, or the opposite. So
we'll see.
With that, let's go ahead and change the vibe up a little bit. Let's get some motion to the lights, yeah. And let's start talking about dungeons. So for those of you that haven't been here before, maybe this is your first episode tuning in, this is DM Roundtable, where I myself, Evelyn J. Judge, or Jonathan Bartholomeus.
Okay.
We get together and we talk about different things that we do at our tables that help us run games that our players find engaging and fun, which I can, having played under these two wonderful human beings below me here, I can say that I am nothing but engaged and having fun in the games that they run. So this episode we're talking about dungeons. We're going to talk about how to run a dungeon, how we run dungeons, how we run dungeons, how we approach running things that are dungeon adjacent, or just interesting things like that. So that's what we're talking about today. So I think that if we're going to talk about that, what we need to do first is we need to have a working definition for what a dungeon is for the three of us. So do either one of the two of you want to go first with like what you define a dungeon as before we get deeper into specifics?
Yeah. I do think it's useful to define it because there is this kind of standard thing we envision, which is going underground, and then there being a bunch of traps and combat encounters. And I think that's the broad strokes. That's pretty much what happens. But I think a dungeon, as far as it goes for game design purposes, is a separate world within the world in which there are closely related and intersected challenges. I think that's basically the thing, is that you have sort of a general world where the players can more or less walk around safely, and if there is going to be trouble, they usually understand that ahead of time based on areas that they're in, and they can get information easily, and the stakes are a little lower. And then they cross a threshold, they enter a world in a world, whatever that might be, and there is a series of challenges in that world within the world that are interconnected and a lot closer and packed together than they usually are in the overworld, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. John, what about for you? What do you define a dungeon as?
It's underground. It's got stone all over the place. It's got traps and encounters.
Hey, Evelyn, I think that we're running into issues with John. I think he,
Yeah.
I don't think he understood the assignment.
What do you mean?
Yeah. No, I think we can.
Could
John,
you hear that?
no, John, it's okay. It's okay. We'll just mom and dad are talking. We'll just, okay. Well, I think, John, you raised a good point. because I do think that most of the time that is what it is. And I think that generally, if you tell your players that we're going to go to a dungeon and fight a dragon, then that's what you expect. Underground.
I mean,
stone.
don't all dungeons in this game have dragons, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
And
the name of the game.
That's why it's called.
They're
that, yeah.
always in the shape of an ampersand as well. Which is going to be our 4th episode. We're going to talk exclusively about the word "and."
No, I was actually memeing. If you want me to add, I'll elaborate more on dungeons.
Yeah.
If you want me to, unless you don't want me to, it's fine.
No, John. The reason we do this is because we like to hear each other's opinions. So yeah, I want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I just like hearing myself talk. So.
Well, yeah, that is incredibly apparent. So then do it.
Yeah. Dungeons are. How do I phrase this? Dungeons
so all that build
most
up,
of the time.
all that build up.
Yeah.
And
So,
you
so
say,
for me,
how do I want to phrase this?
How do I want to phrase this? For me, dungeons are something that kind of elaborates on a story in your world, in your game. It's for me, it's never random. It's never like, oh, you find this random place and you go in there and it has nothing to do with the story, but there's a dungeon here. And dungeons are usually considered like, underground, stone walls, all that stuff. But I mean, it can be anywhere. I think that, a dungeon can be a tower where you're moving upwards. A dungeon could be underneath the ground where you're moving downwards. A dungeon could be quite literally walking into one single room, which is a dragon's lair. I don't know. It's something that takes the players out of the element of the open world into a confined space where they have to reach an endpoint to leave said dungeon.
Yeah.
Or at least reach a goal.
No, I agree with you. In fact, my definition is really similar to that, where I say that a dungeon in this game is any time you have interconnected scenes or encounters through narrow or more guided pathways. So what I mean when I say that is a dungeon isn't necessarily a thing underground or a tower above ground. A dungeon is anytime you as a DM say, okay, here's the thing. They start in this place, and there are 3 pathways to go to 3 different places that maybe those 2 places interconnect. Which means that anytime that you have an investigation in a town, that could be considered a dungeon, right? Because why do we as DMs run dungeons in the first place? We do it because we want to have these really tight stories or these really tight encounters that all seem interconnected. So the reason I do that is because it causes my brain to think differently about the way that I design encounters. So if I use my definition for that, then when I go to design a social encounter or an investigation arc or a city that I know that there's going to be a story happening in, if I design it as if it were a dungeon, it makes it easier for my brain to connect those things and make those themes seem more connected and have it so my players can backtrack through different events that they maybe wouldn't have if I was just thinking straight up like, okay, this is a town, that we need to design this differently. I think there's a good reason why the game is called Dungeons and Dragons, is because 90% of the things that you do in the game could be considered a dungeon if you just like relax your definition a bit. So that's me. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's how I'm feeling about it.
All 3 of us brought up this concept of sort of crossing a boundary, which I think is really interesting. I think to me that's one of the key features is that you have to enter a dungeon, whatever it is. You sort of enter a state of mind in a gameplay zone where the pacing gets more
video game
guided. Yeah, a little more guided, and choices become more clear and more high stakes. Where rather than it being whatever you want to do during these few days of travel on the road, it's like left or right, acid pit or armed guard. Like what do you want to do? I think that threshold is really interesting. And to me, anytime you are entering an area that is bound off in some way, that there's going to be a challenge in, that's really what defines it. And I agree. It can be a whole city. It can be a trail on the road. It could be a lot of things. But it's that sort of boundary crossing for me that I think is like the key characteristic. You don't just end up in a dungeon doing a random encounter on the road.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also, a dungeon has to have sections. Like, you can consider something a dungeon if it has, like, one part here, then the next part's here, then the next part's here, and then the next part's here. Mm-hmm. Or, you have rooms that kind of break off things if you're talking about the underground ones, or, actual buildings. But, like, if you're talking about, like, environmental dungeon where a party is tracking to somewhere, and you're making that track, that travel towards that thing dungeon-esque, then you cut it into sections.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest things about, like, games like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, any From Software game, everybody's favorite part is the phases that bosses have. And one of the things that I think is really underlooked in those games is the phases that areas have. So after you defeat a portion of the game, the area changes. So why not implement that same logic into dungeons, right? After you complete a phase of the dungeon, regardless of how many rooms you've explored, the dungeon then changes, right? And going into the next phase of the dungeon, there's new elements. Right, I think that one of the most important parts about DMing is making things feel like they have consequences. And it could be just the illusion of consequences, right? Nothing actually changes, but the players feel like something did. I feel like that's the important part. Also, I'm very sorry, Felicity, that those were not your favorite part of Dark Souls.
Also, a dungeon can be diagonal. Dungeon can be whatever way you want it to be.
Oh,
I'm very curious, Felicity, what your favorite part of Dark Souls was. Because I would love for you to elaborate on that.
As far as I know, it's nothing. Maybe the vibes. Gameplay-wise, I'm not sure what. But yeah. So yeah, I think that's super important is having phases and letting things change with each section of the dungeon. Even if, like, for the most part, they still look the same aesthetics-wise. Like, there's still, like, stone corridors under the ground. That's a tomb. When you reach phase 2, something changes, The lights that were burning in the braziers, they were burning red, but now they burn green. Like, oh shit, what did we do? And maybe they don't ever get an answer, but it's something where they're like, it's changing, it's reacting to us. This is awesome. Spit in my mouth. Excuse me. Oh my god.
I feel like we shouldn't elaborate on that because we're talking about dungeons.
Yeah, I feel like we shouldn't elaborate on that because it's in the past.
Oh, wow. Thank you for reminding me of that, Felicity. That was good. That was good. Anyway,
spit in my mouth. So, yeah, okay. Let's talk about dungeons. I think an interesting metaphor that just kind of popped in my head is like, let's say you're like, you're serving, your friends come and visit and you're serving them, right? I feel like half the time in D&D, you're kind of like, hey, you guys want a drink or a snack? Like, here's what I got. And then the players are like, oh, cool. I'd love a Pepsi. I would love a Cheez-It. Or whatever. And then every once in a while you're like, here's a meal I prepared. And the players are like, oh, sweet. I'll have that. That sounds great. A dungeon, I feel like, is the restaurant experience. I feel like that's
a course of meals.
That's what it is. It's courses. It's the kind of promise that you're making to your players is like, you're not just going to be like picking up snacks here like we do in most of the game. Like, when you're in here, it's going to be like first course, second course, third course, and it's kind of on that trail.
It's kind of funny when you say it like that and you think about dungeons. Like, a dungeon never really, unless you're playing God, what's the one that Gary Gygax made to just fuck his players?
Oh, the meat grinder or something like that.
Fucking the Tomb of Horrors or something like that. Tomb of Annihilation. Unless you're playing that one, dungeons usually start off pretty tame. They usually start off like simple, easy, and then medium. And as you go through the dungeon, then when you get to the end, it's like, okay, shit's ramped up. You're gonna fight this big thing, which is funny because you never start a dungeon like, hey, here's an ancient dragon. You got to get past that one first, and then at the end, there's another ancient dragon.
Because if you think about what purpose dungeons serve, is they're a great example of draining player resources, so that way by the time they get to the end, they don't steamroll whatever boss you have there. That's why for me it's so important to design most situations that are going to end in boss fights as a dungeon, even if they're overworld, even if they're in a city, because in this game, you really got to drain players' resources if you want to actually challenge them without having to do 50 damage a swing from your monsters. Like, those are your options. Either drain their hit points, and that's the hot commodity, and they can burn all their spell slots, or take the dungeon approach and slowly drain their resources, right? Each fight, make them do something that drains a channel divinity, a wild shape, a spell slots, right? All of those things, and that way by the time they get to the end, it is a really, really tough fight with a monster that they could have fucking curb stomped, if they had gone in their full power and could have just supernovaed.
I learned a really interesting rule of thumb that I just feel like should be brought up here, because it does loosely apply to dungeons. I read this like 2 days ago, and I just went like, for every level that your party is, anticipate that it'll take roughly a round of combat before they are on the ropes. So if you have a level 10 party, they will be handling most things with competence until they've gone through 10 rounds of combat.
It's a good point.
And obviously that's a lot for one fight, so but you spread that out throughout a day. And it really isn't until you're on the 11th round of combat for the day that a 10th level party is really in the risk zone, where any mistake is kind of actually going to have some lasting power and stick with them. It really takes a bit to wear down a high level party.
I mean, even going off of that with putting a dungeon in front of your party and trying to expend the resources throughout the dungeon, not only with encounters, is like also putting something that's either chasing them or something where the things collapsing behind them, something that's going to make them not be able to take short rests or take rest in general. So if they have some sort of like crazy demon thing chasing them through this dungeon that they have to keep moving forward, or someone's chasing them, or just anything that's going to cause them to not have to stop on top of running encounters and doing those things, makes the dungeon a lot more challenging.
On the other side of the coin, I also think dungeons are one of the best places to do short rests. I think it just all depends on... You just have to be aware of the pacing. I think the pacing is never more in your control as the DM. It is always technically in your control, but there are times where you don't want to yank away player agency. And it would be wrong of you not to allow them to spend half an hour or an hour doing stuff that they're clearly having fun doing because of the pacing of the story. But in a dungeon, I feel like, even though that obviously still applies, that is when you as the dungeon master are the most kind of in the driver's seat when it comes to pacing. You have the most power compared to any other setting that you might be running to really minute by minute kind of guide the roller coaster that the players are on. And I think you can use that to your advantage. You just have to be very aware of what you're doing and how much challenge you're presenting and what the party's really capable of. I will also let you know from years of experience a thing that is 100% true. Every single player ever, they are about 3 times as powerful as they think. So just keep that in mind. If you throw a combat encounter at a group of level 5s and your players are like, oh my god, why are you doing this to us, you evil dungeon master, we're gonna die. Just keep in mind that like a karate master, you are showing them their true power, because 10 times out of 10, the players thought they were gonna die like 8 rounds before they were in trouble.
Yeah.
That's just I don't know what it is. I've DM'd long before I played, so I think I don't, but something about just being in the player's seat seems to be scary.
Because I think as they expend resources and get low on things, they start to get more creative and start to get more strategic, because they realize, oh, I don't have any more 3rd level spells. Oh, I don't have any more 2nd. Oh, I've used all my features. Okay, guys. Well, what do we do now? Because
it's over.
yeah. So they become more creative and start doing more crazy things to stay alive. And
yeah.
I think we have a pretty solid working definition of a dungeon. It is a zone in which you cross a boundary of some sort into a game space in which the pacing is more controlled, the challenges are more concise and interconnected, and there is a goal at the end.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much does it. Which leads us right to the second thing, which is, when is it time for a dungeon in your campaign? It's probably not never, and it's probably not always.
Or also what warrants creating a dungeon.
Yeah. What warrants the creation of a dungeon? What is significant enough for it? When is it time for that in your story? Yeah. How are we feeling about that, boys?
Joe, you haven't talked for a little bit. You want to go?
Yeah, I think that it is. So obviously, it's not never. It's not always. On the very fringes of whatever you're doing. There are some campaigns where I could see never doing a dungeon could work out. But I think that for the vast majority, 99% of campaigns, they're going to benefit from it. And when do you do that? I think that it's important to do that when you have a goal or an objective you want the party to be able to achieve, and they need to struggle for it a little bit, right? Just as an example, from Salamander Coast coming up on, Tuesdays and the next sort of mini arc, and the invasion of Periton and the going through the tower and hopefully killing Issen. That's a big thing. And sure, a boss fight with just Issen, I'm sure, would do that justice. But think about how much more earned it's going to feel if, after all this time of campaign, Felicity, her character, Bianca, has to go through a city and then a dungeon, and which is just in phase 1 of the dungeon is just the city, and then phase 2 of the dungeon is the dungeon itself. Right, has to go through all of that till eventually they get to the boss fight, for the potential to kill this entity that has been causing them so much harm and trouble and everything. So I think it's the main guiding light for that is when you want the players to have to earn something, earn a victory, because that is the time when dungeons are going to be most useful to you. Or a magic item, that's I think the simplest one is do you want the players, say you have a paladin in your group and you want the paladin to earn this holy avenger that they were told that they would need to defeat the great evil lord, then okay, then let's do it. Let's have the paladin have the party go through this really tough undead dungeon to eventually retrieve the holy avenger that they need. I think that whether it be an emotional victory or a material victory, you want those to be at the end of dungeons. That way the players feel like it's earned. They actually had to struggle for it.
Have the challenge match the reward.
Yeah, dude.
So when it's a really big reward, it's probably time for a dungeon. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think another thing that you can use dungeons for, or that warrants a dungeon, is lore. If you have a specific thing in your game that you want to shine light upon, I mean, it could be tied into going to get a magical item, or it could just be the party running into it out in the wild where they see some cave entrance and they go inside and find an ancient ruin that's been there forever, and then that leads them on the path to another quest line or something like that. You can use it to explore lore, and also technically with dungeons, it could be hunting someone down. It could be their camp, their hideout inside of said dungeon. So they have to go there and go through this whole thing to get to the end, to get to the person that they need to find, which kind of ties in with the Issen thing.
Bandit Cave is like a low-level staple of mine. That's like one of my favorite things ever to run, is a Bandit Cave.
Yeah, I think those are my two.
Yeah. I remember saying something in last week's episode when we were talking about killing Tiamat. I think there needs to be a reason, just as a storytelling thing. There needs to be a reason that whatever the players are doing, why it hasn't happened yet. Why just other average people in the story world that were already there before them couldn't do something. And I think that is a huge thing with a dungeon, is that is your answer, right? If there is a necromancer that's screwing with a town, the answer to the question, why hasn't anyone solved this, is because there's a 3-layer dungeon with traps and locked doors and undead armies and stuff. So I think high risk, high reward makes a lot of sense. I think parts of the world that are locked away, and I think to combine both of those ideas, I think what interests me a lot about dungeons is buried history of some sort.
Yeah.
Like, the reward is learning about the world that you're living in and uncovering information that has been locked away for hundreds or thousands of years. And maybe to cross the boundary to the dungeon at all, you need information. Maybe that's why nobody has done this yet. Maybe this dungeon isn't even accessible unless you know to throw a rock in this pond at 11 p.m. to activate, to like lift the spell.
Or like in Lord of the Rings, wasn't it the Mines of Moria?
Oh yeah.
You have to speak the word.
Yeah.
Speak the password and the door will open. I know the tongues of 100 languages and all the spells known to men and elves and I love Ian McKellen.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Meow, meow, meow.
You see, it's very simple. It's like a roller coaster. It's Ian, Gandalf! Ian, that's what acting is.
That video is so good.
It is. John, I don't know if you know that video, or if you're just. Oh, you're smiling though. You're doing a great job, bud.
Yeah, I'm just here. I'm existing.
Anyway, I think that one thing that is, I think that's a really good point there, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the players are feeling like the things that they're gaining are earned, and I think that is the dungeons are a great way to do that. So one question that's in a very similar way. This is more so about designing and the implementation of dungeons. Unless anybody had anything else they wanted to say on that. Oh, Trouble's back. Okay. Whenever we talk about D&D and we talk about good games, good campaigns, we talk about a balance between the 3 pillars, right? Exploration, combat, roleplay. So in a dungeon, how do the two of you go about making sure that there is balance to those encounters? And yes, Trouble, I see you, bud. How do we go about making sure that there's balance, not just in combat, right? That's something that's a given, but between the pillars, because if you just have encounter after encounter after encounter that's combat, it might get a little old after a few rooms. So how do you spice it up? How do you integrate some of those pillars into a dungeon?
Yeah, huge thing is information. If the main reason they're there is information, I try to engage with that with exploration more than combat. And I also think locked doors are one of the quickest tricks to engage with the exploration pillar.
Or not even locked doors, just a door.
Just a door, yeah.
If they come to a door and you describe it, you just describe that door.
Mm-hmm.
They're not gonna try to open it, and it's great.
They're gonna try shit.
Yeah. Is it locked?
Amazing.
I don't know. You have to get closer.
Yeah. Oh God.
Are there
Should
traps?
we? I'm suddenly very suspicious of doors. I'm gonna cast 3 spells. Yeah. But like, yeah, but I think like just having a threshold is so useful for that. Being like, I have so many times pulled the 2 keys trick, where it's like, in order to get through the first half of the dungeon, here's a door right at the beginning, like you see it as soon as you come in, and it needs 2 keys. So go look for the 2 keys, and then they just kind of explore around, and then you bump into shit while you're doing that, but the primary objective for that first half is the exploration. And then as far as social goes, love having 2 factions in a cave. I think that's a lot of fun. Like a neutral creature can be the second faction, but it could also be an entirely different group that's there for different motivations. And seeing how the party navigates that can be very interesting and very rewarding if they pull it off. If you can get 2 groups to fight each other to save you the resources, that's amazing. If you can negotiate your way past a certain threshold, you know? I think the main thing, though, is that dungeons they're all about challenges. They're all about, you are here to get a reward, and it should be somewhat difficult. Okay, goodbye, Joe.
Trouble's locked in there.
Yeah. But you're here to get a reward, and it should be kind of difficult. So any of those 3 pillars, I feel like I'm still thinking of them as an encounter, not a general thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, well, I'll probably repeat myself. I think the easiest, most common, and simplest answer to get the exploration, besides combat, exploration and roleplay in a dungeon, and the easiest way to do that is puzzles.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, I was saying, I think the simplest and easiest way to get exploration and roleplay in a dungeon is puzzles. Because they have to explore the dungeon to figure out the puzzle, and they also have to talk to each other to figure out the puzzle.
That's a really good point. Puzzles give pause to any good party, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have a player who's like, oh, I've seen this puzzle before. I knew the answer. Right? It's
impossible. I made it.
It's gonna require a little bit of them to stop and talk. And I think that then the struggle you come across, or that you really need to be cautious of, is making sure that those conversations stay in character about solving it.
Yeah.
I think that is something that is incredibly important. But no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I think that's a great way to have them give pause to it.
Yeah, I think at least a puzzle that forces them to like explore other rooms or go other places. Like if you put a Rubik's Cube in front of them and like, hey, solve this thing, right? One, they're probably not going to talk in character about it. They're probably going to talk out of character to solve the puzzle. And 2, they don't have to explore. So as long as your puzzle forces them to go other places, like your 2 key thing. Gotta go get these 2 things, come back, place them here. So they're gonna explore, they're gonna have combat, they're gonna talk while they're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. Joe, do you have any other answers on that? Because I just thought of a wonderful question. S tier, really.
Okay, that's...
No, I'd say that the only thing to keep in mind is that you don't need to take rests away from them at every opportunity, because, as I found in a lot of my games, is long rests and short rests, specifically watches, are times where really good roleplay happens. So during a short rest, that's a time that's unique because everybody's available the entire time. So you can have good group conversations there. So I understand wanting to make sure that you're like starving their resources a bit, but it's okay to let them have at least one, especially in a longer dungeon. So that way, they have a moment to roleplay. They have a moment to talk. They have this reprieve from the encounters of the dungeon so far. So I think that's my only thing for that.
Yeah. All right, S tier, let's go. So when I started running dungeons years ago, I would describe the dungeons I made as funhouse dungeons, where every room was like it could have been in another dungeon. You know, it was like randomly generated practically of like, here's a monster in this room, here's a puzzle in this room. Here's a, and there wasn't, it took me years to really get to the point where it wasn't just a series of challenges in order to do the literal work of putting shit in their way before the boss fight, but it was a narrative. It was a chain that they kind of went through that told a story. So how would you two talk about that? What do you think is kind of the secret sauce to taking what could just be a series of roadblocks without a story and making sure that it feels like there is a narrative here? How do you kind of pick a theme? How do you thread things together so that it all feels like one cohesive unit rather than a fun house of random challenges?
John, do you have anything? Because I have something that I can start with. Unless you want.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I think that one thing that's so incredibly important when it comes to cohesiveness in a dungeon is context. So what is if you're running a dungeon and a campaign, what's happening in the campaign? You probably shouldn't have a dungeon that is disconnected from everything. So you can have cohesiveness happen by thinking about, okay, what's happening in the story so far? What's happening in the campaign? Why are the players coming here? And then branching out from there. Because cohesion, or like this illusion of verisimilitude, is so important in D&D. Because like, as long as your players feel like things are connected, a lot of times they're more willing to buy in to what's happening, right? But if you're running Beer and Pretzels D&D and you have a funhouse dungeon, then obviously they're not going to buy in. But if you're running Beer and Pretzels D&D, right, for those of you that don't know, that's like more casual D&D where it's about hanging out with a group of friends and just playing the game, rolling some dice, having a good time, not really worrying about the story so far. You can create compelling moments in games like that by saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this dungeon cohesive and try to tell a story in that dungeon. So, making it cohesive is just about paying attention to what's happening in the story and making sure that it's connected to the story. Even if, right, in a scenario where the players find the dungeon and it's something you made up along the way and now you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants and you're like, I don't know what's happening, I don't know what's doing, just try and keep relating it back to the story. Like, just say some shit about the big bad evil guy in this dungeon and you don't even need to know what it means. But it'll make it feel more compelling and more cohesive if it's connected to the story, even if there are funhouse elements in the dungeon, right? Because what's more important in most stories, and especially in D&D, is like the overarching feeling or how somebody feels about the event in its whole, right? When looking at the entirety of the event or the dungeon or the story, how do I feel about it? So if you say something about the big bad evil guy or about the story so far, even if elements of it were more fun-housey, by the time they get to the end and they're thinking about it in retrospect, it's going to seem more cohesive than maybe what it actually was. And then, if you did make it up, you can have some of those enemies that came up in the dungeon that you just threw in there because you thought they were cool in the ranks of the big bad evil guy to make it seem connected, right? Harkening back to that style of like gardening DM, where you plant seeds and you don't know what they mean. You just keep watering them until eventually they sprout to be something that you never would have imagined they would have been. So that's my answer there.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that last part. So if your dungeon should most all of the time, especially in a campaign setting, should be connected to the story. There shouldn't really be a time where it's not connected to the story. But if it is one of those times where it's not really, it's just some sort of fun session, inside of your dungeon, you can reverse engineer to bring things up later on. Like they go into a dungeon, they see a mural of gods fighting or beasts fighting. And then 20 sessions from now, they see one of those beasts that were on the mural. And immediately it's like, oh my God, we saw that thing 20. Oh, it's all connected.
Yeah.
But at the time, you were like, I just think this mural thing would be cool. I'll maybe use it later. It's same thing with like, maybe it's not a dungeon where there's a boss at the end. Maybe it's a dungeon where there's just an inhabitant at the end. Where like, I don't know, there's like a sphinx at the end. Or some sort of NPC that the party then becomes friends with or gets information from that maybe comes up later. Or or not even comes up later. This becomes one of those characters that the party then remembers from there on out because they went through so much work to get to the end, talk to this thing. Maybe it gave them some lore that'll help them later on. So if you're doing like a funhouse dungeon, you can always immediately, as you're going through it, write cool things in off the top of your head, and then go, okay, I'm going to use that later on in the campaign so that it all feels connected.
Yeah.
But overall, I think dungeons shouldn't be random in a campaign setting. They should always have a purpose.
Yeah. I thought of an answer in the 5 minutes I was listening to those answers. So I could say some. There's this really like painfully simple writing advice that I was given once that I think applies to this dungeon. Nice snack, Joe. What are we snacking on? What we got going?
Kayla dropped it off earlier. It's just bread.
Oh, hell yeah. Good bread is worth it on its own, for real.
I'm living my Cecily vibes right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know me. Of course I would say that. But yeah, so I got this really, really simple piece of writing advice that I think applies to dungeons incredibly well. And it's just add, subtract, multiply, divide. That's all it is. If something is working, do it more. If something's not working, do it less. If two things are working, see what happens when you put them together. If two things are working and you want to generate some meaning out of them, then combine them together and simplify the story. Add, subtract, multiply, divide, that's it. I think like a really wonderful example of this is like, if you're playing a video game and it's like, first, here's an encounter with some enemies. Then here's an area where the game introduces you to some tripwires. And you just spend like a room or a tunnel or whatever kind of getting around the tripwires. And then the third room, you see more of the enemies and tripwires. And that's it. Like, that's the formula. A, B, A, B.
Yeah.
And that alone, I think, adds a lot of cohesion, and it makes the dungeon itself feel like an ecosystem. Like, people, either creatures living here or people here that designed things on purpose, there was a uniformity to how they went through this space and set everything up and lived in it. It wasn't just like some crazy guy set up bombs in this room for no reason, and then stopped. And then nobody went into that room for 30 years until the players showed up. It's like very set up, and it makes sense. And when those elements recur later on, your players often feel very smart when they have that aha moment where, like, I can lead the zombie into the bomb, or something like that. So I would say that was a huge, just kind of quick and easy trick that I started figuring out that really has helped with all my dungeons. A, then B, then both.
I like that. I like that a lot. John, I believe at this point now, you are somebody who hasn't asked a question of the two of us. So Jonathan, I bequeath unto you that honor. What what
Thank
question?
you for your bequeathment.
You're welcome. What something is? Do you have any questions about anything that either you've run before in the past that you'd like to get our opinion on, or anything like that?
I think one of the questions I think is super simple is what is something that you find you always put inside of a dungeon when you create it? It's like you always go back to this one thing that's always, most of the time, in your dungeons. And then also, after that, Felicity did have a question. I think it's for Joe specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, that one. I think that's going to be a Joe thing, but
So then I'll sit out of this question.
My first.
No.
Oh, I'm dark.
Evil Evelyn.
Okay, we're good. I'm good, Evelyn now. But I mean, other than a locked door, because I do genuinely do that almost every time. I gotta tell you, I'm a very big fan of the journal cliche. I think there's not been a single dungeon where I haven't used it. And it doesn't need to be a journal specifically with a bunch of like notes in it or whatever, even though sometimes it is. But just having written evidence of somebody that lived or visited this dungeon long ago, to me, is, you know, like, there's a reason that that's been in every video game with dungeons in it since the 90s. Like, not just because it's easy to do, but because it really works. It really does. And, like, there is a way for it to be oversimplified, you know? I mean, there's always, like, the very gamey thing of, like, I've written down the code to this lock just in case you need it. Signed, Jeff. You know, like, that kind of thing. But I also think, like, you know, like the trope of, like, a researcher that died, and you read through their notes before you enter the boss room, and if the players find the journal and go through the checks of, like, investigating it or whatever, they can get that information, and it's beneficial. Or, I even sometimes do that trope, but visually with, like, ghosts. Like, the players have some sort of connection or power that allows them to see spirits that were in this dungeon at one point, and it plays out a scene. And that essentially serves the same purpose. It's like a journal entry of a thing that happened here in the past that gives them information on how to not meet the same fate that these people did. Yeah, I think I use that all the time. I mean, my first answer is definitely locked doors as well, but the journal thing, it's tried and true. Just having, like, a document from somebody that was there before. I don't think I'd ever make a dungeon that didn't have that.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because I've run so many varying types of dungeons that I don't know if there's anything that I've ever done that is a staple. I think that in old places, so like older ancient places, ruins, I love including mosaics or tapestries depicting stories from a bygone age. I think that's one of my favorite things because it's something I can imagine so clearly in my head. And I think that's, anytime I go for visuals and anything, I always try and think of things that I can easily imagine, because then I know at least when I go to say it, the players will have an easier time picturing what I'm saying because I have such a clear image. So I think that my go-to in dungeons is definitely mosaics or tapestries or a depiction of ancient events from yesteryear. That's my go-to, I think. In terms of, like, I don't really do traps. That's never something that I've ever done in dungeons too much, aside from, like, trapped chests. I'm trying to think if there's anything else from the dungeons that I've run, but I cannot think of anything. One thing I do like to do is I like to throw NPCs that have either been captured or that are on the fence about what side they're on, so that way they can talk about it. I think that's a great idea, because then you're throwing a roleplay element into it, and one that the players maybe weren't thinking beforehand. Like, oh wow, this goblin that's in here is kind of having doubts about this thing. I wonder if there are other goblins. Maybe we shouldn't have just killed 15 of them in the other room, you know? Because they're sentient creatures. They have these thoughts and feelings. So I'd say those are my big two things: mosaics and tapestries, and then individuals that are in there in some capacity that are going to talk to the players.
Nice.
Very nice.
All right, Joe, I'm going to read you this cue
Yes.
from Fel Has Wild Magic, a recent regular of the channel, who's really been enjoying these roundtables. But she basically asked here, when you're doing a campaign where the whole thing is a dungeon crawl, aka our campaign from college a few years ago, how do you handle the challenges and rewards that we were talking about earlier? I hope that is an accurate interpretation of that question. I'm sorry if it's not, Felicity. I love you. But yeah, I think this is mostly a question for you, but perhaps John and I will be able to tag on, because you did run a dungeon crawl campaign.
Yeah.
And there was pacing in there that made it so that we had entire sessions of roleplay and such. But yeah, how did you handle that to such a grand scale?
I think that this goes back to something I was saying a bit ago about phases to a dungeon. Because what I did in that campaign is the entire thing, it took place over the course of a semester, so it was about 16 weeks, 18 weeks, I think. What I did is I broke it down where I was like, okay, this dungeon, this massive city inside a mountain, had 9 layers, and each layer is its own unique thing, that then the party, when they go from one layer to another, to another, to another, they build renown with different factions within the mountain itself, which will then affect one thing or another, giving them special features or thing. I really went into it thinking it was a long-term campaign that would take a year, not 16 weeks with everything I was doing for it. But that's the folly to being a new DM. It's sometimes you do a little too much.
Hey man, a folly to DM of any experience level. Shit takes a long time.
Yeah,
I think it's the folly of any DM who cares.
yeah.
Yeah, you just want to do too much, you know?
Yeah. But what were the challenges? I'll start there and then go to the benefits. So challenges was definitely making each area feel unique, but still make sense inside the dungeon itself. Right, because for context, the dungeon was inside a mountain, I said that, but it was like an old dwarvish capital city. And so it becomes an issue there of like, okay, how do I maintain the disguise that this is all the same place, but make each one of these places feel so incredibly different that it doesn't get boring or stale? And that was a big challenge. And eventually what I decided is I was like, okay, I'm going to make each one of these unique, but I'm going to say that there is a layer of dwarven stuff, and then there's a layer of inhabitants, and then there's a layer of conflict, and then there's a layer of new people trying to get in. So it was this like sandwich, or this bean dip, where everything was kind of stacked on top of each other. So that way, they were thin layers. So if you look at it, straight down, it all kind of looks the same. But if you look at it from a distance, it's like, oh, there is a lot of variation there. So that was a big challenge, making everything seem different. Another challenge was giving the players opportunities for roleplay. That's the struggle with a dungeon. It's like, well, how do you do that? And that's going back to what I said earlier. It's about making sure there are NPCs there for them to talk to. That's something that's really important. Benefits? Benefits, because I said that there were so many new inhabitants and so many influences from other planes of existence or things like that, I could do some weird shit in that dungeon. Like, one of the lairs was like controlled by a flump who was like in like a control room, and he was like doing shit, and the party had to save the flump, and that was a lot of fun. One of the coolest things was there was a layer of the dungeon that was like the grand walls into the main city of Craghammer, or to the main city of Craghammer is from Critical Role, which is what I named at the time because I like the name. But now it's Khazad-dûn or
I believe it's Durandur.
Durandur, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Durandur, and that's what it is now. So it was the final wall and final checkpoint of getting into the city. So there was this massive, like metal door that was like 300 feet tall and had all these like magical enchantments on it. And the only way they could get in was by brokering a deal with one of 2 dragons that oversaw this area. And due to the curse that was in the mountain, these dragons were actually like, they were polymorphed into dragons by somebody else. And one was a spellcaster, one was like a brutish general. And so then they had to decide what they were going to do. And so it was really funny because one side of the map was covered in ice and like torrential snowstorms, and the other side was like fire and magma and geysers, and then the middle of the rest of everything was like steam just surrounding the entire place. So like their visibility was low. They you know, there were cool like atmospheric things I could do there, and that was just really cool, being able to have things that were so incredibly different in ways you can't do in a campaign like Salamander Coast or Isles, because the parties, they're traveling to different places, but it's not as confined. So you can't do nearly as much as I was doing there because the Durandur was such a it had so many weird influences in it. Like, I think one of my favorite parts about it, aside from the dragon, was the start of the dungeon, because it started as a tourist trap. And Evelyn, I don't know if you remember that part specifically, but you get there.
I do.
Yeah, you get there, and there's like a tavern at the top of or at the like middle point of this mountain, or like the bottom of it, or whatever. And everybody's like, "Oh yeah, it's great to have you here. Welcome." Yeah, well, whenever you want to go down to the dungeon, just head on down, and you can. And so the party does, and they go to the end of the dungeon. And the first part is this like little city, and it's so cute and quaint. And there's like daylight that's, you know, put up in the area, and they're just like tourists. And then they go into the dungeon, and like the real dungeon, and it's actors that are paid. And they're like goblin actors who are paid to like wander these halls and fight the party members. And then when the party members kill them, right, the goblins would pretend to be dead. Like as soon as they'd get to like 5 hit points, they'd just fall unconscious and they'd be like, "Ah." And then after the party went through, somebody would come through and collect the bodies and like would heal them up and then send them back out for the next group of adventurers. And they ended up, this is just a stupid thing, but there were 2 really, really dumb elements. For one, they found a craft room. Like they found an area where the goblins would hang out when they weren't on set. And there were like snacks and food and drinks that like these actors were eating. And they met a guy down there who was wounded, Maximilian something the third. And he was like wounded, he was bloody, and he was like, "I won't live. Tell my wife and my children that I love them so. And another thing," like, and he was just such a ham. And he was just the most overacting actor ever. And it was so fun. And then eventually they get into the real dungeon, but that was a really fun way to start it off. So that was a benefit of it, is being able to start it off a little more wacky, and allowing it to be a little more weird.
Yeah, I will say the escalation itself was very cool too.
From a tourist trap to fighting a lich on top of a mountain.
Yeah, that was really cool. And for it to be so literally divided was it was fun. Like every time we went down the elevator to the next layer, it was like, you know, we're about to get fucked up in 5 new ways. It was really cool. I think I have one more question that I'm interested in, and then we have a little surprise I believe we were going to do in the second half. But stay tuned for that. First, real quick, we've kind of gone over that. Although dungeons are typically a rocky underground place, they can be a lot of things. It can be a crypt, it can be a wizard's tower, it can be a portal to a pocket dimension, it can be an underwater tunnel network, it could be a mine, it can be a abandoned building of some sort. what is a type or theme of dungeon that the two of you have never run before, but you find very interesting? Something that you would like to run at some point, a theme that you think would be very cool.
I'll grab that one real quick. It
Nice.
would probably not really come to a shock to the two of you. I've probably run maybe a handful of dungeons as a dungeon master. I think I've run 5 or 6 dungeons in my entire time of being a dungeon master, and that's because I'm also newer. I mean, I want to do an underwater dungeon. I want to do like a prison. I want to do. I mean, with Evrand, I've set myself up to do all kinds of weird shit and dungeon stuff. Extra planar dungeons, you know. I haven't really done a lot of them actually. So basically, all of the ones that aren't regular go into cave, do this thing, or go into ruin, get thing. But yeah, that's me.
I really want to do a heist. That's what I want. I want to do a dungeon where the dungeon is like a 3-story building, and there's not a boss fight so much as there is an item that you need to get, and then you need to get out with it.
Yeah.
Because and this goes way back to the first edition of D&D, but, you know, it used to be that, like, getting gear, back when the game was a lot more resource managey, and mechanic heavy, getting shit in the dungeon was the first half of the challenge.
Yeah.
And then you have to get it out. And that idea to me is very, very captivating. I'd love to do a heist where you spend, you know, all of this careful planning just to get to this thing, and inevitably a bit of a mess has been made along the way. And now you need to get out. And keep that item, even though there's definitely things in here that want to kill you and also want it. That to me is very interesting. And then my other little answer is I years ago did like what you could consider a dungeon, which was like a dream sequence where the party, in order to have enough power to defeat the main boss of that campaign, who was the first beholder, King Rallicor, which was a level 14 to 20 campaign, so but in order to get enough power to do that, they needed to have their souls opened up so that a fragment of a dragon's soul could join them. And then all of them would have a fragment of the same dragon within them and have, like, connection with one another, but they'd also have, like, augmented powers. And it was only then that they'd be powerful enough or whatever. So they did a dungeon, which was basically where they were put under by a shaman, and then they went through a dream sequence. And that was a dungeon that had no combat in it. Because it was all, like, trials that they were going through. And, like, talking with past versions of themselves, and, like, settling old baggage with the dead, and stuff like that. I really, really, really want to double down on that and do it again at some point. That might be a top 10 dungeon type for me, is, like, dream sequence that is a dungeon. So
that is a good one. I really enjoy that. I've done that a couple of times. I did it in Farah, and I look forward to having to do it again in other campaigns. For me, though, oh man, that is rough. I feel like because of Craghammer, I've run so many different types. I'll double down with John and say underwater, but like really underwater, like bottom of the ocean underwater, where darkness is a really, really, really big deal, even with dark vision. Like, you have so many things that you need to worry about, and like the aberrant creatures you can put at the bottom of the ocean. That shit's awesome. Kraken? Hell yeah, dude. What's crack-a-lackin' with you?
Whew. All right.
Wow.
So I think that
Whoa.
underwater is a good one. One that I'd love to play in is which I think that for the campaign that I play in now for Evrand, this time is kind of past, but I would love to do a bandits in a cave dungeon. So obviously I love the encounter with oh shit, Lot. Yeah, there you go. It took me a second to I kept thinking it was not, but I was like, that's not right. Lot. The encounter with Lot and all of them. But I'd love to do something that was like the similar vibe where there's like dangerous terrain connecting two pieces and traversing through a cavernous cave that's filled with bandits. I think that would be a lot of fun, and that's something I'd love to play in versus run. And I just thought of one. I would love to run a dungeon that is like on the side of a mountain. I don't even know what would be there, but like, but like it's like these like if you have the mountainside, you have these like plateaus that are sticking out.
It would be a 2D scroller game.
Yeah, but that sounds terrifying. You know,
you'd be playing Super Mario in D&D.
Yeah, but imagine like you get one of those plateaus and you have to fight like, I don't know, like ice giants. What's to stop one of them from picking you up and fucking tossing you over the side of the mountain?
Oh man, now I can think. Thank you,
Jeff. No, I take
for context, they're in a frozen tundra with mountains all around them. So,
yeah.
I mean, just imagine with that dungeon, you can't go left and right. You can only go forward and back.
Yep. It's terrible. You have to run towards Donkey Kong. That is Mario's fate.
Yeah. Barrels are being thrown down. Yeah, you gotta jump.
Oh god.
Dang, man.
That's awful. I'm sorry that I did that to all
even the Fellowship didn't do that, man. They would rather go to the mines of Moria.
And look how that worked out for him. Gandalf fucking died.
Well, he determined it was better than what you're suggesting. So...
Oh, damn.
I mean, you could just do what Lord of the Rings did, have him walking on the side of the mountain and lightning strikes. Yeah. And someone falls.
Man. Weather dungeon.
Weather dungeon, yeah.
Weather dungeon.
Literally, the town is picked up by a tornado, and then they're just fighting on floating, like, Faramazul or whatever from...
That'd be fun.
Elden Ring. Yeah. All right. Well, does anybody else have anything they want to add to that part specifically?
I am good, and I think I'm ready for you, Joe, to introduce the second half of what we're doing here.
Right. Let's fucking go, dude. So, one of the things that we thought would be fun is to end this episode in the last half an hour we have here is to design for all of you a map that you can use, a dungeon that you can use in your own game should you need one on the fly. Now, this is something we're going to design in about a half an hour, because that's a half an hour to 45 minutes, about how much time we have left here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition us to a new page. All right, our faces are smaller, but if you'll notice in between all of us, we've got a little mappy boy. So here's one thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to share my screen, but it's going to be rough because it's going to change it. So show my screen. Uh-oh.
We should take a break really quick.
Yes.
Or at least, I got to move the baby to the crib, so,
Okay.
I'll be back.
Yeah. Let's brief break for just a little bit. And yes, this is the last thing. You can make suggestions as we're going through it. Please make suggestions as to things that you would want to see, or as we're talking about what to do. I think that we'll use the rules of improv here, and we'll probably take from the audience a suggestion of where to start. So think of that while we go to a quick break while John transports baby to new place.
Yeah.
Nice.
We're back. All right, here we go. Our first suggestion from Gemma is Nudes Dungeon. Well, if we can't find anything
Thanks
else,
for watching, guys. We'll see you.
might be what we have to do. So, for this, one of the things that we'll start with is for anybody that's watching, is there any specific thing you'd like to see, like a cave dungeon, a tomb dungeon, underwater even?
Yeah, I think we should start with setting, and then we can go from there.
I was gonna also suggest setting, and we should just keep it super simple. And what's the end boss?
Yeah, I was just gonna say setting and monster. I feel like those are the two big. All right. Gemma is insisting on a nudes dungeon.
Well, I mean, Aboleth has noodle arms.
A lot of creatures are naked. So, I mean... Okay, alright, here's a real answer. Tower to the sky birds. Nice. Fight birds.
Okay. All right.
That's pretty good. Now, rule number 1 of dungeons, folks. You gotta have snacks. I personally...
I don't have snacks.
That's alright. You know, I personally never make a dungeon without at least snacking a little bit. So I got here a baked Lay's chip. Joe still has his hunk of bread.
It's a smaller hunk now. It's just a chunk. It is changed in size.
You're right. Chunk is smaller than hunk. No.
So if we're doing a tower, if you're making a dungeon and you're doing a building that elevates, right? Like it's not like you can make it what is it? Like a vertical map. You have to make rooms. So you have like level 1, level 2, level 3, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we should find a basic shape for the rooms. Is this a circle tower or is this a square tower?
Yeah, and I've often made like a 2x2 grid for towers, or just buildings with elevation in general. So you can kind of make like one map and reveal squares of it as you go, so that the party can kind of keep track of everything, and have like basement 1, 2, 3, or just 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on whatever you want to do for that particular one.
Okay, so Felicity said harpies. They want to fight harpies at the top. So
harpies?
Here's my idea. Here's my idea. Joe, you should find tree stumps, and there should be a giant tree that at the top is a nest.
Okay.
Okay, so nest up top, and the tower is less a building and more...
It is a tree. Yeah.
The way that you ascend up to the nest. That's cool. Okay. Fel also says, and like there's beautiful music that can put the PCs in a trance. So we gotta work that in.
I don't know how we're supposed to do that on Incarnate, but sure.
No, that's. I'm a fan of this idea in general. I think it's pretty fun. Alright, so Joe, I see you're placing down some stumps. That's nice. And I see you have an entrance on one of them, which is nice. Oh, she meant trance. I could have never guessed.
Okay. All right.
Dungeons these days transing the NPCs, shaking my head. I agree, Phil. It's really out of hand. We need we need to put a stop to this. All right, so I see you have an entrance there on the upper left, and then it goes up. And I do like the quadrant idea in general. I think it's cool because that way the players can keep track of the floors as they go up, and I think that can add to strategizing sometimes.
I think for chat, what we need is that, okay, so this is a tree that is a dungeon leading up to the top to fight harpies. We got that. What other key features need to be inside this tree to make it a wackadoodle? We need those from the chat. So far, we got staircases.
Hey man,
Staircases?
listen, I'm working with what I got right now.
Squirrel friends.
All right, you got to
Okay.
put squirrels inside.
Okay, so I like the general idea that there is animals in this harpy's tree that they
So
have
would the floors be grass inside of a tree?
Well, right now I'm adding flooring.
Oh, you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll take back my my assholeness, my toxicity.
Yeah, toxicity of our city. Okay.
So, yeah, I think having natural like beast creatures that are here that the harpies have some influence over, I think that also has the potential to be combat or social. I think that's interesting. Fel also says vines that want to trip you, like the banana peel in Mario Kart. Thanks for the addition. I didn't get it at first. So we already have a potential social or combat encounter, and we already have like a trap that can be solved perhaps via exploration.
Okay.
Bees! That's another recommendation.
So we gotta have squirrels, vines that'll trip you, and bees.
Nice. Okay. I think there's
Just
a nice
make it wood.
theme. There's a nice theme here already of like
Well, oh no.
the harpies have kind of used the aggressive nature in this area as to their advantage, so people can't get up to them as easily. I think that's nice.
That is nice.
So, Joe, you have these staircases going on, which is interesting. To me, that implies humanoid traversal at some point in this tree's history, perhaps even currently.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting as well.
Because what I'm thinking is that, right, if we're gonna explain sort of semi sentient creatures have taken this place over, I think it'd be interesting, right? Because we want to make sure that we're integrating lore or whatever we're doing into the map itself. So I think that by having us say that this is something that potentially belonged to maybe like an elven outpost or something like that, I think that that's a lot of fun.
That was abandoned.
Yeah.
Or the harpies killed them and took it for themselves.
Or a druid's hideout, and the harpies killed the druid, and now the animals that are there are confused. I feel like that's something. We also have another input from Phil. Yo, sap? Could be a trap or reward.
Okay.
Nice, okay.
Okay, so one of the rooms has difficult terrain. The floor is covered in sap.
Yeah.
Okay,
Feel
so
like that's fair.
let me do this. Let me build a little bit out here. Okay.
Okay.
Surrounding this first layer of tree. Okay, so that way we can make an implication there. about it. So, and let me change the thing here. Uh-oh. Made a boo-boo.
Oh, what'd you do?
Fixed it. Okay. So what we can do is we can add to the thing out here. We can add a couple of trees outside the big tree.
Okay.
And then we can say that these are where squirrels are. So squirrels exist outside, and that's where they can give the party, should they choose to talk to them, they can give the party valuable information about what may be existing inside here.
Okay. So that's kind of the crossing of the threshold, is you can talk to the squirrels in the tree before you enter.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So what we'll do is we'll annotate this as one.
Oh, Felicity's coming in with one more. Deku tree. It's gotta have a face.
Well, I don't think that necessarily conflicts with anything. Get them spiders in there.
Nope. Vetoed. Vetoed immediately.
Immediate veto.
Okay, so is there a sap stamp? No, there's not.
Honey. There should be honey.
Is there? Okay, there's honey. No.
I lied.
Amber. Aubergines.
No. Just scroll down. Scroll through. Wait. Do we want to make the floor sap, or like you just gonna put a little bit of sap? A little sap.
I was gonna put sap, because if there's harpies in here, the harpies aren't gonna be inhibited by that. So I wanted to put it on the floor, so that way it's difficult terrain for the players, but not for you.
You could use a brush instead of item.
I think that might be a good idea. I was just trying to see if there was anything that we could. Gold coins. Okay, let's see if we got something in here for brushes.
Brush.
These are pretty, but definitely not what we're looking for. Dry grass. Cracks with lava.
Remember, we can hue change to these so we can make them look like sap.
Yeah, but it's got to be like one of those broken up textures. Here we go. Stones. Filter. Hue. Okay. Saturation. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. It doesn't help that they're gray.
Maybe try the dry grass.
Yeah. All right. Dry grass. There we go. There we go. Okay, let's make it... Actually, I think that if we just bring the saturation up... Ooh. Ooh.
Pretty nasty.
Ooh. Okay. And then let's...
Are we sure we don't want the end person to fight not be harpies and just Winnie the Pooh? Like...
I guess pretty good.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Oh no! Did you put the stairs to background?
Yeah, I did. I did that on purpose. That way, as soon as they start climbing up the stairs, boom, honey on their feet.
Nice.
You got honeyed.
Oh wait a
This
second.
is being a DM.
Actually, wait a minute. We don't want to put the honey there. We want the honey to be here, because that's going up. So instead, what we want to do is we want to flatten these to the background. Oh shit.
Oh, goodbye.
Yeah, we do, because here's what we're gonna. God damn it. Let me just. Yeah, there we go. Right. This is the fun part about working in Incarnate. There we go. And then, right, just as a little teasy here, right, when they go in here, we can give me that back. Let's make our brush size a little bit smaller.
Yeah. Ooh, what is that yellow stuff? Is what the party will say.
Well, that's all part of the plan.
There you go.
That's nice.
Actually, I'm gonna undo that. I don't need to be this clean, but I feel like I feel like I have to be.
We have 15 more minutes, Joe.
It's okay. It's okay. I just wanted to turn the opacity down a little bit. That way it's like faint, like it's leaking. Okay. All right. So we have entrance room here. And entrance.
So it looks like we're planning on a combat encounter on the second floor.
Yeah.
Right. So probably a social or lore thing or something
Jesus
on the first
Christ.
floor. I don't know what you're doing with that.
Didn't Felicity say Deku tree?
Greco-Roman.
Didn't she say Deku? Okay. Anyway, yeah, so combat encounter on the second floor here. We got the honey, so we'll have the harpies and the sap, sorry.
I think so we already have talking to the squirrels. As a way to get lore. I think a little bit of lore here in the first room would be nice, but I think the main thing should be a puzzle or way to figure out how to ascend the tree. I think maybe that should be the main challenge here.
There's a tree inside of the tree?
It's a stump table. So this could be something where they find a little bit of lore to start out with about what exactly is happening in here. Right. A little bit of decoration goes a long way.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. So there's a piece of paper on this table in the center that says, Harpy killed me. Drew.
Yep. They're pecking my flesh as I write this. I am bleeding out. It'll be like that journal in Morrowind that it says he wrote with his blood, but it's 4 paragraphs. It's one of my favorite things ever.
Okie dokie. And then if I just look up Faye. Faye rocks.
You know what else you can add to the honey/sap room?
What?
Near the staircase, add a blood trail.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right.
They have a paint for that.
Oh, they do?
Uh-huh.
Where?
Select all the other ones. All the style packs. Select them all.
All right. Select them all.
Okay. Well, I fucking lied, apparently.
Yeah, you really did.
Okay.
That's all right. We can recover from this. Randomized stamps. And we.
Oh,
can...
do it on the second. Do it on the second one, not that one. There you go.
Okay.
She died on the second floor.
Blood spatters lead up to the third floor.
I think the third floor, definitely a puzzle that you need to solve in order to get to the fourth floor.
And this is where we can integrate the vines.
Hell yeah.
Okay, I know we're integrating the vines here, but imagine if the vines were integrated on the sap room, where it's already difficult terrain.
I think vines introduced here, and then there are still some on the top, so that we can do the A plus B, AB thing I was talking about earlier. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
And they get up there and they're like, oh, these again. But now it's in the heat of combat.
Yeah.
And I can't approach it delicately. So definitely vines, and then I think some sort of puzzle would be interesting, like an arcane lock that the harpies didn't need to worry about because they can fly or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Another quick tip for y'all: making dungeons, you really need to have your party and their general level in mind when you're making it. Because one of the main things that makes a dungeon fun is the limitations that your party is placed in. And as I said that idea just now, I immediately realized that any party that is level 5 or higher could very easily have access to flying. So...
yeah, this is definitely for a level 1 to 3 party.
Yes, for sure.
Make that thing opaque.
So that's just a general thing to keep in mind. And the higher level your players get, the more whack you need to be to challenge them. But you also do just need to accept that at that point, like once you're level 10 and above, part of the point of the game from then on is feeling like a badass, and there's not much way to circumvent that, nor should you worry about it too much. You should let them feel like a badass, because there are going to be times when they're really high level where the wizard has a spell called End Encounter at 7th level, and they'll just use it, and that's fine. You just got to be fine with that. But when you're making a dungeon, make sure that the conceit of the dungeon is adequate for the limitations of the party. Because if not, you can very quickly run into bad situations, like I have multiple times in the past, where they just don't have to do an entire room, or maybe the entire dungeon at all. And that can be rough.
Indeed it can. Indeed it can.
And that is where you get your fun mirror dungeon, except it's the entire dungeon. So if they skip the whole thing, you just take it and put it over here now.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Let's do this one later.
Okay, I'm adding some green mist in this room.
Ooh.
There you
Nice.
go. Okay. All right, so they enter, and as they enter... Okay, they enter, and as they enter, they're greeted by the creeping fog, right? They see that as they enter, right? As they enter right here. And then in order to get around, they have to figure out how to traverse through this, like, poisonous mist leaking through the sigil here with all these grasping vines that deal a whole bunch of damage. Then let's see. What can we do puzzle-wise here to change that?
Well, I mean, that's a puzzle in itself. They just cast a fire spell on it.
Yeah, it could very well be that.
It ignites the poison gas. Well, then they blow up.
Yep.
Uh-oh, better save.
You made 122 changes, Joe.
It'd be really awkward if something bad were to happen. Okay. Uh-oh, loading images. Uh-oh. Okay. So what if the actual way to disarm the puzzle, though, is there are these, because it's a druid's hideaway, there are butterflies that they have to catch. And then as soon as they catch all the butterflies, because that can be like a skill challenge, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is
I also like the implication that the druid themselves, when they were alive, could just be like, here, butterflies.
Yep.
And then get through. So it makes sense that this was a defense that they would have set up, because they could very easily circumvent it.
Exactly. Okay, so we have butterfly 1.
This is turned into the key room in Harry Potter. You gotta get your broom. You gotta get the broken winged key.
Exactly. So we'll say there's 3 of each. Right. So then they just have to catch the 6 butterflies, or they can cast a fire spell and deal with the explosion afterwards. And yeah, so there we go. All right, cool. Look at that. That's a fun little puzzle room.
All right. I'm pretty happy with that. So we have our 4th room, which I assume will be... There was a bit of a combat encounter in the sap room, and then I figure there'll be like a harpy final fight here at the top.
Yeah. Oh my
where we
God.
can incorporate a little bit of sap, a little bit of vine. Oh my god. Okay, change of plans.
What if we do, right? This is what the vines lead to, is a carnivorous plant.
Nice. Okay.
And
I'm fine with that.
This is what the harpies are feeding. Like, the harpies are here because of this bad boy.
Okay, so
There's just a corpse flower on top of the tree.
Maybe after the druid died, the harpies corrupted the tree.
Oh, yeah, and this used to be, like, not a bad tree.
Yeah. And now
Maybe.
it's, been awakened or something, and it's hungry. Feed me Seymour.
And this is for you, the viewer, to use your imagination on.
Yeah, right?
This
Listen,
could be whatever you want it to be.
I do need to add this here. just so I can
Right.
blur it.
So spiky vines, maybe another sap spot or two, just to have that affect traversal in some way. And then, yeah, I could see just like plant monster and 3 harpies that are flying above, and like that's a boss fight right there, for sure.
Yeah. So I just need to add the stairs here, just so that way there's the implication of like where they came from.
Yeah, you good.
Okay. Dokie. So we have a carnivorous plant.
Nice.
Let the map making software be your muse, okay?
Yeah,
know,
especially if you're drawing pen and paper. You know, just let that paper speak to you.
Yeah, and because you'll come up with some weird shit, and that's fun, you know.
Yeah.
Where are? Here we go, and we'll get the little baby vines. That way, there's still some of the same like incorporated elements from before.
Yeah.
I'm
a fan.
Little baby ones, little baby vines.
The only other thing I think this could use at this point is I really like small optional rewards and optional choices. So like a thing that maybe you choose not to engage with because you want to save your resources, but if you do, there's a chance for a small reward.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we could just throw the first floor is a little less occupied than the others. Maybe we could just throw a locked chest in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just something real simple like that.
You know, the other thing is with this dungeon, you know, it's dynamic. You know why? Because your players could just quite literally go to this tree, especially the room with sap, and cast Firebolt and burn the whole thing down.
Yeah. It's a tree.
Because sap is very flammable.
Mm-hmm.
And so are trees. So
yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting, again, the limitation thing of like, you can breeze through just about every room of this dungeon with fire magic, but you just have to be aware of what you're doing. That's a fun limitation.
And then 5.
I also think a good tenet of dungeon making that we didn't touch on too much, but is a part of good D&D all around, is making sure that there is a chunk where every player and every character can shine. And I think we pretty much did that here. There's terrain difficulties, there's lore, there's places where magic would really help, there's cool boss fights. You know, like I feel like in a 4-person party, the ideal situation here is that all 4 of them have a room that they are kind of like the star of.
Yeah.
And I feel like that could really happen here.
I think it's funny because, you know, when we said we're gonna make a dungeon, I bet everyone thought we were gonna make an actual like classic dungeon. No, we made a tree.
We made a tree, a corrupted tree with harpies.
And that just goes to show you, anything can be a dungeon as long as you give it sections.
And to bring it all full circle, the art for the harpy in the monster manual is naked. So this is a nude dungeon. Harpies probably aren't wearing much clothes. I'm just gonna be real with you.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a priority for them.
There you go. You're
All
welcome,
right.
Gemma and Felicity.
You're welcome. That's what you get for being dedicated viewers. Even when we hate what you have to say, we still do it. Woo! And I'm just trying to see if there's any final touches that I want to add here. Just a little bit of spice. We are
A dead body.
We're right at about time here, so that we did it.
We pretty much did it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
I would happily run this.
Yeah, this is a fun time. I don't think that
I
there's...
think what I would like to ask the chat, which is Felicity and Gemma, we've done dragons. This was dungeons, and we did running encounters. What is something you want to hear us talk about as DMs?
Yes, that would be good.
What is
because
something that you'd be interested in?
We can keep coming up with topics every week, but I would rather be talking to the audience and things they want to hear rather than just to each other.
Yeah.
Because we could just keep talking to each other forever, but,
We could.
you know. But yeah.
And the final thing we'll do here, just for a little bit of spam, we'll add a couple of Elven statues in here.
Nice, alright. Adds to the corruption element here.
Yeah, and then we can even...
You want us to talk about how to be a menace?
Well, that's not something we should do. That's something you guys should do.
Yeah. That'd be player roundtable. New show coming up soon. Actually, you know, talking about being menace, we should talk about villains.
Yeah. Villains in general is a good episode. I can get behind that.
Organizing as a DM.
Yeah, note taking, what to save, how to organize, outside and in-game. Ooh, note taking. I would have very little to say in that episode, which, in a way, is saying a lot. Yeah, I want to know what you do when presented with player backstories when you start a campaign and making that all come together.
I'll save you time. I don't read them. Fuck it.
Joe doesn't roll dice, and John doesn't read your backstory. You heard it here, folks.
I'll be completely honest. If you give me an 8-page backstory, I'm gonna read the first 2 pages, and that's it.
You know what? Let's save it for the episode.
So why don't we just make next week? Provided that the chat vibes with it.
DM prep would be.
Well, not even just DM prep. Why don't we just do when you're presented with players' backstories when you start a campaign? Let's just do starting a campaign.
Yeah. That's a good one.
That is that's one that has a lot to talk about, and I think that it is really good. Huh? Question mark. All the effort.
I think Felicity's upset that I said if someone gives me an 8-page backstory, I'll read the first 2.
Yeah, okay, I also have thoughts on that, but we'll save it. We don't need to...
Yeah. We will get into it next week.
Yeah,
so look at this.
That's a good topic for episode 4, and then we can do, like, Villains episode 5. We can do planning versus improving in general and organization and stuff. There's, like, episode 6, and... Yeah, I'm a fan of this so far. I think this is good.
I was gonna add one little thing here, but the image isn't loading. That's really sad.
This is completely off topic, and I just realized this as I looked up at the stream. Our background colors are red, white, and blue.
America,
yeah.
again.
Well, America, well, I know I'm free.
Proud to stand up next to you in the
There's no doubt
land. God bless the USA.
On that note.
There you go. We even have a nice little cutesy archway there. And then just to fill out the rest here, just because I wanna make it. Fuck moss. God damn it.
No, I think we're good. I really think we're good. I think we did it.
Yeah, I think you're ruining it.
You think so? You think this is ruining it?
I mean, what you just did looks a little strange, I will say.
Why is the opacity so low? Oh, because of the thing we were doing there. Oh, why is that like that? All I wanted to do... Fuck! No! all I wanted to do was make this all
Oh,
match.
no.
So that way it didn't look so fugly. There we go. There we go. There we go.
I thought you
All
specifically put a bottom around the one that you enter through so that you could tell which one was the entrance.
I know what I did, but now it looks cleaner, so that's good.
There's numbers. There's
There's numbers. Yeah, you got it. You got it. All right. Well, with
Anyways,
that is our map. Look at that. We got 4 rooms. We got an entrance. We got things and stuff. On the YouTube video, if you're watching it on YouTube, I'll make sure to include a link to the Incarnate page. Should you want to clone that and edit it, whatever you want to do with it, I'll make sure you have access to it. So, with that, thanks for watching, everybody. Another episode of DM Roundtable. Next week, we'll talk about starting a campaign, getting things going, and integrating players' backstories into the story that you may or may not have planned. Final thing that I'll say here is be sure to tune in tomorrow at 6:30 Central Standard Time for the Salamander Coast, or next Sunday, not next Saturday this week, but next Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for the continuation of the Isles of Iverion, or next Monday for the next episode of DM Roundtable. If you're watching it on YouTube, be sure to try and tune in live on Twitch. You can interact with us. You can ask us questions. That's what this is all about, answering questions people may have. So with that, thanks for watching, everybody. If you're watching on Twitch, don't forget to follow. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.